the reports of Kansas's death was an exaggeration, Nick. And I think, with how freaked out sort of everybody got when you got Mbiya going to NC State, when you got Darian Williams going to NC State, when you've got this player or that player going there, when you're losing foreign players to Duke, and you're just like, my gosh, how is Kansas going to fill out this roster? All of a sudden, you kind of have your guard group set with Rosario. And Paul Mbiya, I think the reason Kansas wanted him really early on, to your point, is he's a terrific fit.
Pay heed all who enter and beware this podcast. That's right. This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're back again so soon because there's more breaking news as Kansas basketball has added another player to its roster. After weeks of sort of downtime, not much happening in terms of commitments, Kansas has pretty much finalized its roster. We'll get into that in a little bit more here on today's show. Of course, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And by the way, if you have not already, you should be subscribed. Apple, Spotify on the audio side, on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Really appreciate those of you that share your thoughts in the comments. Please continue to do so. Interact with the show, like the show, subscribe to the channel. We are pushing for 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. We're going to be doing live shows all throughout the fall and into the winter with KU football post game. And last year we did some live shows for KU basketball as well. We'll probably be continuing that as well. So you'll want to be subscribed on our YouTube channel for that reason. And it's a great way to interact with other KU fans. And we are over 950. So we're getting close to our goal for the offseason of 1,000. So really appreciate you if you have already subscribed. If you haven't, it just takes one click to do so. And if you're a big golf fan, I would also highly encourage you to check out the link in the description of the show for the KCSN Golf Tournament. It's a fantastic opportunity to support the local community. KCSN's foundation does a fantastic job with the Kansas City area community. So if you are in the Kansas City area, you want to play in the golf tournament, you want to be a part of it, you want to donate, you want to possibly win some great prizes, check that out. It's coming up on August 18th. So you got still a little bit of time. I think registration goes through July, so still plenty of time. But check out that link in the description of the show as well. So yesterday, if you missed it, Kansas added a high school commitment in Cole Rosario, who announced he was going to commit to Kansas and reclass back into the class 2025. So he will be joining the team. And we spent a lot of time towards the end of that show talking about, okay, what's left? Well, Kansas still in search of a big man. And we've been talking about Ege Demir out of Turkey, and Paul Mbiya was the new name that had resurfaced. And it comes out Wednesday morning as we record. Paul Mbiya has announced his commitment to join the University of Kansas. So that's a big commitment for KU. It checks off a huge box in terms of a need. We'll talk about everything that he brings to the team. But I kind of want to backtrack here, Kevin, first with the timeline of Paul Mbiya.
Yeah.
Because he's a name that we've been talking about for the better part of almost 2 months at this point. He was a guy that Kansas was interested in all the way back in late April and into early May. They actually officially offered him on May 1st. He was a guy that he's from the Congo originally, played in France, played in the EuroLeague as well a little bit. He is 20 years old. He actually just turned 20 in April. And he was a guy that the KU was on pretty early in the transfer portal process, international recruiting process. He ends up committing to NC State in early May. He committed to NC State back on May 4th. After KU offered him, NC State offered him, he commits to NC State. Obviously, I think it's well documented if you paid attention this offseason, sort of the I don't want to call it a rivalry, but the back and forth between KU and NC State with Darian Williams ending up going to NC State after KU pushed pretty heavily for him. NC State is a program that they got Will Wade as their new head coach, which injected a lot of energy and enthusiasm into their program. It's obvious that they had a lot of financial backing as well. And so Mbiya ends up committing to NC State, and okay, I guess that's the end of that, right? He signs with NC State. Well, NC State has been continuing to do some additional recruiting and looking for players to add to their roster. And I think that may have contributed a little bit to ultimately Paul Mbiya's decision to decommit and reopen his commitment a little bit. That happened. He decommitted officially from NC State on June 18th, so exactly 1 week ago. KU obviously being previously interested, as I just discussed, decided to hop back in and start re-recruiting Mbiya again. And he is a player that I know from a measurement standpoint, Kevin, he really jumps out, and that gets you really excited, I'm sure. But what else do you think he brings to KU now, having officially committed to come play in Lawrence?
Well, first, I want to tell you a kind of a funny story about Mark Twain. Mark Twain was a guy that a rumor kind of got out that he was really, really sick, and a newspaper reporter reached out to him and basically said, "Hey, you know, I hear basically you're on your deathbed." And Twain writes back and says, "I've heard those rumors too. I've even heard some rumors basically that I'm dead." And I'm writing this to tell you that's not the case. And he ends it with, "The report of my death was an exaggeration." And of course, that has grown over the years to the rumors of my demise were greatly exaggerated, all the different ways that people want to put that. But the reports of Kansas's death was an exaggeration, Nick. And I think, with how freaked out sort of everybody got when you got Mbiya going to NC State, when you got Darian Williams going to NC State, when you've got this player or that player going there, when you're losing foreign players to Duke, and you're just like, my gosh, how is Kansas going to fill out this roster? All of a sudden, you kind of have your guard group set with Rosario. And Paul Mbiya, I think the reason Kansas wanted him really early on, to your point, is he's a terrific fit. I mean, when you look at, this is a guy that has NBA ability, NBA athleticism, has NBA length, certainly. I think that's kind of what you were alluding to. The reports of his wingspan are kind of, some people say it's 7'6", some people say it's 7'8". It kind of jumps around. Either way, this is a guy that can pretty much tie his shoes without bending over. And he's a really high level shot blocker. He's a guy that dunks a lot of stuff. He does have some rawness to him, but there's a little bit to be intrigued by there. And honestly, Nick, I think he's a better free throw shooter as well than Egi Demir. And so there is a little bit of skill there that you could potentially tap into and continue to develop. And one of the things that we talked about sort of from the very start when we were talking about, hey, what do you want with Fleury's backup, is basically you wanted somebody that you weren't going to lose a ton when Fleury went off the court, whether that guy supplied energy, defense, shot blocking would be great, and potentially even somebody that could be an NBA guy himself, or somebody that could stick around for a couple years and be somebody that could be an NBA guy, a year or two from now. Those are all boxes that Mbiya checks. When you look at the length, the athleticism, the shot blocking, the defense, this is a guy that when Fleury goes out, Kansas is still going to be really, really good defensively, and teams are still going to really struggle getting things at the rim. He's also, physically pretty well put together, and when you add all of that, I think the game is going to be a little bit fast for him, even with playing in EuroLeague the way that he does. There's going to be an adjustment period. But Nick, you've seen Baylor have kind of these raw international centers who have come in, and for 10 minutes you almost forget that they're out there, and then in the next 10 minutes the guy blocks 3 shots, grabs 5 big rebounds, gets 3 fast break dunks, and you're like, my God, that guy just changed the game. I think Mbiya has a lot of that, and I think he fits further into this team's identity, which is this is going to be a team that's going to be kind of grindy on you, that's going to be defensive in nature. And you look at what Bill Self likes, a team that has a point guard that can score and create for others, a team that, is going to be probably a pretty elite defensive team. This team is really starting to fit what you would think of it in terms of a Bill Self team.
Yeah, and with Mbiya, I think we talked about it a little bit even back in early May when we were first kind of doing some preliminary scouting on him when KU was interested. One of the things about him is a lot of it is projection at this point. He didn't get to play a lot in Euro, so it's another one of those players where if you were to just look at the box scores, you would say, okay, well, what's up with this guy? Like, he played 3 minutes a game, played 4 minutes. A lot of these types of players, it can often be projection. But you mentioned it. He measured in at the Adidas Euro Camp at the end of May at 6'11". He's got incredible wingspan that you highlighted as well. So he certainly checks all the boxes athletically. And this is a player that truthfully is already on some NBA draft radars heading into 2026. So he's already somebody that I think has been highlighted by some NBA scouts as, hey, this guy has all the athletic tools and then some. It's just a matter of him demonstrating a little bit more on the court, and he's going to have that chance, I think, certainly with KU. So a very, very exciting pickup, I think, because now you have Flory Badunga. You knew you had, along with him, with Trey White, and you had Bryson Tiller, but that was the last glaring need after the commitment of Cole Rosario, who we talked about yesterday, which if you want to hear more about Cole Rosario and what he could add, I would encourage you to check out our previous show, breaking him down. But with Mbiya, absolutely. Now you've got the square peg and the square hole in this last spot, or one of these last spots on Kansas' roster, and I think that's very significant. We talked a lot about Egi Demir as well out of Turkey. This, I think, feels like it was going to be an either-or situation for Kansas, so you could probably write off Demir, I would say, at this point. He's a guy that had a little bit more experience at the professional level in Turkey, but I think we kind of mentioned, like with Mbiya, that the ceiling feels much, much higher in terms of NBA potential, in terms of what he could do at Kansas as well. And I want to add this as well. Let's say we expect Flory Badunga to do what we think he can do, which is take a big step forward in a sophomore season and play like a potential first-round level NBA caliber player, right? Let's say that happens. Well, in that event, certainly you would say, okay, Flory Badunga is going to be no longer on Kansas's roster going into 2026. He will be in that scenario, more than likely headed to the NBA draft. Well, in that scenario, let's say Paul Mbiya is able to play 12 minutes a game at Kansas and really start to build a little bit and learn the system a little bit more and become more comfortable over the course of the season. Maybe he makes some flash plays, but he's working his way up. Well, now you're talking about a guy that in 2026 becomes your Flory Badunga. In the sense of, he's a guy that flashed a lot in his first year on the team, and now he would become your primary center. And you're talking about basically a pipeline of you would just rinse and repeat and say, okay, you played 12, 15 minutes per game in your first year on campus. You showed some flashes. Then in your second season, it's all yours. You got the job, and you can go out and perform at the level that you want, and then go on presumably to the NBA draft. I think would be the expectation at that point. So I think that's probably like the ideal scenario for both Kansas and for Paul Mbiya is you come in this season to KU, you work with Flory Badunga, you work behind Flory Badunga, you provide some really strong defensive depth off the bench at that 5 spot. You showcase a little bit of your skills playing, 12 minutes a game, whatever it may be, behind Flory Badunga. Badunga has a great season, goes on to the NBA draft. You can take his place and then do the same thing in 2026. So I think that would be the most perfect scenario really for Kansas. And then if you want to get into the high school recruiting weeds, you have a guy like Ethan Taylor, who's a 2026 7-footer in the Kansas City area that KU's recruiting. Yeah. And so, you're starting to think about, okay, you really are able to sort of create this pipeline of really big, athletic, tall centers that are really bouncy type players over the next basically 3 to 4 years at that point, which would be very, very exciting for Kansas because I don't know if Bill Self is specifically thinking this, but it's easy from the outside to look at it and say, hey, you had Hunter Dickinson, who was a really, really great college player, who was, just a different style of 5, right? Sort of that, not necessarily showcasing so much explosiveness, athleticism, and so on and so forth, even though he was an excellent scorer and a polished offensive player and a really strong rebounder. Well, now you're setting yourself up to have a completely different archetype of 5-man, which is the more Flory Badunga, Paul Mbiya type, which is incredibly athletic, incredibly dynamic, very long arms, really explosive, can jump out of the gym, all those things, excellent shot blocker. That's what you're heading towards now with Kansas. And I wonder if that was in the back of the minds of the Kansas coaching staff, after having 2 years of Hunter Dickinson, saying, hey, Hunter Dickinson was a great player, but maybe he didn't do the things that we want to do to be successful all the time, especially on defense. Well, now all of a sudden, you knew you had Flory, and you were able to convince him to stay, I guess, really is the big thing. Now you add in Paul Mbiya, who is another player of that same type, and you're talking about basically for 40 minutes of every game that KU's going to play this season, they are going to have a legitimate shot blocker on the floor at all times, essentially, with this Paul Mbiya addition. That's the way that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I agree. And you look at the guards that Kansas has, and they're guys that can really pressure the ball, and you can allow those guys to extend a little bit, knowing that you have those shot blockers behind them, right? That's a deterrent where, Darren Peterson can crawl up on top of the guy that he's defending. Counsell can get out, into the jersey of the guy that he's defending, and you can allow them to get beat because you have, sort of that deterrent back there, and that's a huge deal. I know a lot of people are going to look at Mbiya's, overall AFSL numbers and be like, gosh, like, how do you even tell if this guy's any good? He played mostly for AFSL's like under 21 team. And for the under 21 team, Nick, 15.5 points per game, 11.1 rebounds per game, 3.1 blocks per game. And so, shows a little bit of the potential that he has there. But like you said, I mean, the big thing is, he's going to defend and rebound. He's going to block shots, and he's going to hit the glass, and he's going to be somebody that's going to probably be a pretty good roll threat, at the rim on the other end, to where when Flaherty checks out, you're not just saying, oh my gosh, like it's Parker Brown. Now we can take advantage of it. And I'm not trying to, cast shade on Parker Brown. I'm just saying, like, it is hard to find a second big guy that's willing to come in and not, be that guy that's playing 25, 30 minutes a night. And so to get a player of Mbiya's caliber to be Flory Badunga's backup, and I'm guessing Bill Self will find a way to play the two of them together at times. But for the most part, they're going to be a like-for-like trade. Like you said, I mean, Kansas has to have the best center pairing in the Big 12, and that's not idle talk. I mean, there's some really good big men groups in this conference, but there are teams that may have a better big man than Flory Badunga, but not necessarily, hey, when your starter goes out, who can you replace this guy with? And I think Kansas got a really high potential guy. And to your point, somebody that could be in the program for multiple years and potentially come out as a high NBA draft pick on the other end of it.
I want to talk a little bit more about what Mbiya means, and also maybe look at the roster now in totality, as we think that KU's probably done adding sort of its real significant pieces. So we'll get into that, touch more on the roster coming up on the other side. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
I'm BJ Kissel, founder and CEO of KC Sports Network. Emprise Bank has been with us from the beginning. They were our first network partner, and they believed in the vision of what we were building from the start. I can't speak to any other banks or companies and how they operate, but I can tell you from personal experience and based on the growth of the network you're listening to right now, that if you have banking needs, call our friends at Emprise Bank. We've worked with so many great people there over the years, from Vicky and Aggie to Andrea, Lori, Jackie, Deb, and Aaron, and not to mention so many others that not just supported KC Sports Network, but supported our KCSN Foundation as well. But the best thing that I know is that if I have a question or a problem, no matter how dumb the question is, I know who I'm going to call and who I'm going to talk to. And I know that I'm getting an answer from someone that I can trust. And I know that person is there to help us. That's why Emprise Bank has always been and continues to be our partner in Possible. And they can be yours too. You just have to reach out. If you have a banking need, whether it's business or personal, hit me up. I will connect you directly with the same people that have helped us build KCSN. And that's our friends at Emprise Bank.
Folks, there's nothing that beats relaxing on a hot summer day and watching some baseball. And there's no simpler way to get in on the action than by downloading the Pick 6 app from DraftKings. It's crazy simple. Just pick more or less on the stats for two or more of your favorite players, and boom, you're in the mix for big cash prizes. And the best part, Pick 6 is available right here in Missouri. Don't miss out on the fun. Don't settle for a smaller payout. Switch to Pick 6, and right now, new customers can get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Here's what you got to do. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN for new customers to get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Bonus picks expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. Once again, if you have not already, please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast on the audio side. And you can also check out our YouTube channel. Join literally 1,000 other great KU fans supporting us as well, joining on the conversation. We always got some great commenters asking questions and joining in on the discussion on the comment side as well. So really appreciate you if you are doing that, and please continue to do that as well. We are going to be shifting to some KU football talk coming up, as we are less than 2 months away from kickoff of the 2025 season for KU football. So if you're looking for your football fix, have no fear. We're going to be getting into that, diving deeper into some preseason discussion about KU's schedule, where KU might be ending up. And of course, obviously, we'll be excited to be out at the new booth coming up this fall also. So you want to absolutely stay subscribed and stay tuned in for all that great coverage coming up in the fall. Of course, it used to be, with KU basketball, people used to use the term spring bill in terms of, okay, you get everything nailed down. Well, now it's kind of turned into, I guess, summer bill a little bit over these past couple of days, with Kansas getting Cole Rosario and Paul Mbiya to run up their roster. If you want to know more about Cole Rosario, the high school, I highly encourage you to check out our previous show. On Tuesday, we broke him down. On this show, we're talking more a little about Paul Mbiya, who recently committed on Wednesday morning to play for KU. Some great conversation about what he could bring to Kansas as well. And now, we talked about it before, KU has had 3 spots open coming into the week. They have added 2 players, obviously, in Cole Rosario and Paul Mbiya. And Kevin, it kind of feels like that's what KU is going to roll with at this point. Like, I'll be curious if they decide to add another player. They don't have to. There's no law that says you have to have another player. But I think Kansas pretty much has its rotation at this point, I would say.
Yeah, I think if you add somebody else, it's either going to be a multi-year play where you're saying, hey, this guy's a good prospect. We don't necessarily have minutes for him today, but let's get him in the program, teach him the system, and he's somebody that can help us out a year from now. Or it's going to be somebody that fills sort of a super specific need, right? If he's a 6'7" guy that's out there that shoots 45%, where you're like, hey, this is a big shooter that can come in and play this role. Or the guy that we talked about yesterday, the Turkish forward, is somebody that's a great athlete that could defend the 3 and the 4. That's kind of a highly specialized skill set. And not that he couldn't do more, but I think when you're looking at the roster now, it is pretty much finished. You're pretty much rounded out. And so it's either looking at it and saying, gosh, we're just this little bit away, and we want to add somebody like that that's going to be in the rotation, can fill a highly specific role if needed, or it's going to be a reclassification, or a foreign guy that's a multi-year play where you're saying, hey, you're not really going to help us this year, but let's basically pull the red shirt and give you a chance to come here and develop over the course of the year. And sometimes those guys wind up playing too. I mean, who can forget Ochai Agbaji being a guy that came in with the thoughts of redshirting his first year, wound up being needed his first year with injuries and attrition and all the different things that happened. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see them fill out the roster, but I think as we sit here today, we can have a discussion on, hey, this is probably going to be the starting lineup. This is probably going to be the rotation. And whoever Kansas also gets probably isn't going to throw a big monkey wrench into that projection.
Yeah, and just to go back real quick to what you had mentioned earlier in the show when talking about Mark Twain, it really has been a roller coaster of an offseason, I think, in terms of we're dead, we're back, we're dead, we're back. And it feels like Kansas now is in a position where I think there's reason to have a lot of confidence in this roster and what KU has done. And we've talked about it really for the better part of almost 3 months now since Kansas got into the offseason, which is, I think you and I both agree, we really like what Kansas had done in the transfer portal. We like the on after some more fit guys. It's just that when you take a couple of big swings on a couple of players that you feel like could be real dynamic additions and you don't get that, I think it's easy then from sort of an optics perspective to say, oh my gosh, well, this has been a failure. This has been not a good offseason. Like you lose out on a potential 5-star player in Dame Sarr. You lose out on Darian Williams. Like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Like this is really bad. And the bottom line is you still have Darren Peterson. We talked about Ford, the number one player, probably going to be the number one pick in the draft. And again, you surrounded him with players that are on paper really, really good fits, players that are going to fit in and have the type of mentality and the type of playing style that I think are going to fit in well with what Bill Self wants to do and how he wants to coach. And I think KU got away from that, quite frankly, over the past couple of seasons where maybe, they fell for the eye candy a little bit of players that were averaging, 16, 17 points per game, or guys that were flashy on tape and maybe weren't necessarily the greatest fits for whatever reason. Right. And so I think setting aside the failures of not getting Darian Williams, not getting Dame Sarr, setting that aside, if you look at this roster now with what KU has done, I think you have to be very pleased with how things have come together for Kansas. You have Darren Peterson. You have Flory Badunga as your two anchors. You brought in a couple of really, really strong transfers in terms of Melvin Council and Jaden Dawson, who I think are going to fill some really, really strong roles. Trey White is going to be a good addition. Then you look at what they just did with Paul Mbiya and what he's going to bring in terms of a backup center. Now you feel very, very strong at that position. You talked about it on our last show. Marco Jackson continues to seemingly be developing both on the court and off the court as a leader too, I think. Yep. When you add in all those factors, yes, were there some bumps in the road this offseason for Kansas? Sure. But I think at the end of the day, as we sit here now with this roster, as you said, basically essentially completed, I think you feel pretty good about where this roster is. And truthfully, I don't think this Kansas team is maybe going outside. I guess I should say this outside of Darren Peterson. Outside of Darren Peterson, I don't think this Kansas team is going to generate maybe as much like a national buzz or as much like people really talking about this team as a true national title contender. But I think they absolutely can be that. And I think truthfully, this may be a kind of an interesting role reversal for Kansas in the sense of, hey, for a long time, KU's been every year, every offseason, it's been, hey, this is a top 5 team. This is a top 2 team. This is the number 1 team in the country every offseason. And some seasons they've lived up to that. Some seasons they haven't. Obviously, recently it hasn't really been that way. I think this year it could be a little bit of a role reversal where maybe Kansas is the team that people are overlooking a little bit, where people say, hey, sure, they've got the best player in the country, but maybe they're a top 20 team, top 15 team. And we could be sitting here in January and February where they are right there as the first or second best team in the conference, and they're pushing for a top seed in the NCAA tournament. And it would be sort of an interesting, I guess, dichotomy of Kansas always being the Goliath, and maybe this year not necessarily being David to that extent, but certainly being a team that is not in the conversation as a top 5 team to start the season. But over the course of the year, they prove through their grittiness, through toughness, through essentially Bill Self basketball, what Bill Self wants to do, and obviously having a player like Darren Peterson as well, that come February, you could be looking at this team as a top 5 team when maybe they weren't that way in the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, in 2011, you had UConn win a national title basically with kind of a grimy group of dudes that, played defense. I think they were top 15 defense that year. They were top 20 in the country in shot block rate. And Kemba Walker, right? And how many close games did that UConn team have? Not just, in the NCAA tournament, but you remember that Big East tournament where it felt like Kemba was hitting a game winner every single game out. And you look at this team's formula, I think they'll be better than that UConn team overall. I mean, that UConn team finished like 7th in the Big East or whatever. I think this team
weren't they a 7 seed? And
they weren't that bad a seed. They were a 3 seed, even with having 9 losses. So yeah, the 2011 team, like they were really good. I think, though, that Kansas, kind of fits that formula of a little bit of, hey, this is a team that's going to be in close games. They're going to, again, have mentally tough guys. And, gosh, you think up until the last couple of years, Nick, how often Kansas won those close games. And the last couple of years, that hasn't been the case. They haven't had sort of the mental toughness to win I remember talking to Lon Kruger after Kansas had beaten Oklahoma in a really close game at Allen Fieldhouse, and he basically said something like, well, our guys hoped they would win. Kansas knew they were going to win, and that was the difference kind of down the stretch. You've got guys on this team, Nick, that I think know they're going to win, especially when you look at Darren Peterson and the way that he is, and that's so contagious with the way Melvin Council is, with the way some of these other guys approach it, with the way Flory Badunga, quite frankly, approaches it as well. I think this is a team that even when they're not making shots, they're going to be good enough defensively to be in the game. And then in the final 3 minutes, who would you rather put the ball in the hands of than Darren Peterson? And so I think that's a pretty good formula. And to your point, I think they really filled in the holes. And what I mean by that is, would all of us have loved to have Dame Sarr, another, potential lottery pick wing on this team? Yes. Would you like to have Darren Williams, a guy who was a first team All Big 12 guy in this group, playing probably as your 4? Yeah, sure. Like that would certainly add to your upside. But at the same time, what they did here was, I'm not sure there's a glaring weak spot when you look at this roster where you just say, oh, this team's not going to go very far because of A, B, or C. I think they have enough shooting threats on this roster. I think depending on how Marco Jackson comes out is going to be a tremendous X factor for this team, because he had a really rough freshman year, and that's what people remember. He was a McDonald's All-American. He was a guy that was projected by a lot of people as a lottery pick, a first-round pick, whatever, for a reason coming out of high school. And if he's just playing with confidence, I'm not saying he's going to be a first-round pick coming off this year or anything like that. I am saying, though, there's a big gap between where he was as a freshman and I think what you can expect him to be this year, coming off of it's been 2 years since that freshman year. And if Marco Jackson becomes a really positive Big 12 player, I think that's something that a lot of people aren't even counting on at this point. And that's another thing that sort of adds to that. When you have Jaden Dawson, he's a guy that not only can really shoot, Nick, but is a guy that, has made a lot of tough shots, 25 plus feet, off the bounce, because he was expected to carry an offense. I think Melvin Council is probably going to surprise people with how well he shoots, not because he's going to be a great shooter, but because he's going to be getting open catch and shoot looks versus what he had to do previously to try and generate offense. Trey White is a guy that you're not sitting here saying, hey, this is going to be a 40% three-point shooter, but you are saying, hey, you can't leave that guy wide open in the corner because he's going to hurt you. And so I think there's going to be enough of that. Defensively, they've got a lot of interesting pieces, multi-positional defenders. I think that's an area where El Marco could really thrive this year. Darren Peterson is a good and aggressive defender. Melvin Council is going to be a really high-level defender. You talk about the big guys that you mentioned. Trey White is a good positional defender. All of those things are to say that, yes, I get where people were coming from, where it's like you wanted the A++ thing, where it's like, hey, we're throwing out a lineup that nobody can match. But I wonder at the end of the day, if not having weaknesses, if being strong from a chemistry standpoint, which has been one of the things that you hear the most in buzz about this team so far and workouts and everything, is that the chemistry is excellent. The work ethic is really good. And I think the other part is we always think about fit with each other, and that is important, right? Like, it's not that DeJuan Harris you can't win with DeJuan Harris. Obviously, Kansas won with DeJuan Harris. It's not that you can't win with KJ Adams. It's not that you can't win with Hunter Dickinson. It's not that you can't win with Rylan Griffin. It's not that you can't win with Zeke Mayo. But when Rylan Griffin's not making shots, DeJuan Harris isn't going to carry that. You're not going to have KJ Adams missing shots, and the fit together isn't great. And so that's important. But I think even just as important, Nick, is these are guys that fit Bill Self, and they fit what Bill Self wants to do. And I think that that's going to be something to watch this year, because I think this is going to be a team that he's going to be able to coach hard. I think this is going to be a team that responds to that, and kind of you see them grow throughout the year like we've seen so many Bill Self teams do. And so I think the fit with Bill Self is another sort of check mark where, hey, this may be a team that checks in that first AP poll or whatever at 12 or wherever, but it may be a team that, hey, by the time it rolls around in February, you don't want any piece of this squad.
We often talk about the Bill Self circle of trust on this show.
TM.
Yeah, exactly. That's trademark, by the way. So don't, yeah. But just real quick here, just a really brief sort of, I guess, first edition of this exercise, of this offseason exercise. Now that we feel like we do have a full roster here, let's say it's 8 guys. What 8 guys do you think are you looking at here? Obviously, Darren Peterson, Floyd Badunga, those are your 2. I think you can throw Melvin Council in there. You can throw Jaden Dawson in there. Trey White, that's 5. Marco Jackson, Paul Mbiya, 7. Anybody else you think? I mean, that's 7. That's 7 right there. Well, anybody else you think is going to be in that conversation by the time we get to tournament time?
Yeah, I think Cole Rosario has a chance to carve out sort of a role as that extra wing there. I think to your point, when you look at that, you don't really have that sort of 3-4 guy in that group, and that's why I think that could be maybe the one piece that they're still looking for that could join in that rotation. I think Cole Rosario could be that guy. Quite frankly, I know we've been a little hesitant about him on the show, but Bryson Tiller could be that guy. And I think that it's just we haven't seen him play for a while. We haven't seen him play at this level, obviously, at all. And so I understand the hesitancy, but I also think that, you know, he's somebody that if he comes in and he can back up Trey White and give you those minutes at the 4 and whatever else, he's somebody that could be in that group as well. And so I really think that they're getting sort of to that 8-9 man, Bill Self circle of trust, early on. And obviously it's hard. Paul Mbiya hasn't played a game for Kansas yet. So, he may come out and not work hard and all of a sudden we're sitting here and saying, hey, no circle of trust for you. But I also think that a lot of these guys, when you look at the energy that Mbiya plays with the ferocity that he plays with, you see him fitting in there, right? With Jaden Dawson, he's a guy that is mentally tough. I think that's something that will play with Bill Self. Melvin Council is mentally and physically tough. Melvin Council may be the easiest, like, when Kansas took him, you were like, yes, that's a Bill Self guy. Yes, this guy will translate. Yes, this guy will play well. Maybe since Kevin McCullough. McCullough was another very obvious guy that when he came in, it was like, okay, this is a Bill Self circle of trust guy, pretty much getting right off the bus, pretty much. And so I do think that there's that. I think from the reports that we've heard and everything, it does sound like El Marco is being the kind of leader that they need to be in addition to everything else. And so you would figure that he would factor in there as well. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of that rotation. I think it'll be interesting to see as we go through those first few games, because Kansas doesn't slow into this season, Nick. With the schedule heats up really fast. And so I think that's when we're going to find out, like, hey, is El Marco your starting 2 next to Darren Peterson, or is it Jaden Dawson? And either way, I would expect both of them to play a lot. I actually really like the thought of Jaden Dawson, I've talked about it on the show, being that Curtis Jones 6th man, if you want to keep it at Kansas, being the Remy Martin kind of 6th man, where you tap him on the shoulder and say, okay, go score points now, please. I think that he fits that role really well. It wouldn't surprise me if he won a starting spot, though, Nick. And so I think some of that stuff is obviously going to get decided early on. You're probably going to find out, like, hey, is Trey White a 30-minute a game guy, or is he a 20-25 minute a game guy with either a newcomer stepping in there or, if Bryson Tiller is exceeding expectations and he's somebody that you feel like can really play in that spot. And so some of that stuff is going to get decided early on. But I think in terms of, hey, this is the group, I think you've got a pretty good handle on it.
Yeah, and this will absolutely be a trial by fire situation because, as you said, KU's schedule starts very difficult and it pretty much stays difficult through the entirety of non-conference play. And then obviously we know with the Big 12, it's a night in, night out basis basically in the Big 12. I think it's not as much so now maybe than it was, 3, 4, 5 years ago. There are some games where you can say, okay, like you should be able to take care of business there. But the point still stands. Like it's the Big 12. Generally speaking, you're going to have tough games on a nightly basis. So yeah, it'll be a trial by fire for these guys. But overall, I think, again, if you take away the negatives and you sort of look at what this team built, what Bill Self has built to this point, they did a lot of exactly what we asked for in the offseason, which is don't worry about trying to get the guy that averaged 18 points per game. Don't worry about trying to get the guy that shot 41% from three. Don't worry about trying to get the guy who's the highest rated transfer or whatever. Find players that fit. Find players that you think are going to work together well. I think Kansas absolutely did that. And then I think to bookend it here, you add in Cole Rosario and you add in Paul Mbiya, two guys that fill major needs just in terms of personnel. And obviously with Mbiya, I think you and I both agree there's NBA aspirations there. With Rosario, he's a guy that also could certainly develop as well and be a real perimeter threat for Kansas also. So I think you have to be excited about that as well. So overall, I think if you were to give a grade of this offseason, where would you go with this?
It's funny because I would grade it pretty highly, Nick. I think especially if you take out the quote-unquote recruiting battles that Kansas lost, right? I think that's if people are down on this team, I think they're going to be down on this team because of the what if part of it, right? But just leave that out, right? Like,
yeah,
leave out all the recruiting battles and just say, this is Kansas's roster. What do you think of the roster Kansas assembled? And I'd say it's an A, Nick, because I think you had a situation that was really grim, honestly. When you look at, I think some people were even talking about, message board chatter, Twitter chatter, or whatever, at one point when the roster was just totally cleaned out, like, and Flory hit the portal, was like, oh my gosh, is Darren Peterson even going to leave? And to be fair, Darren Peterson never gave that indication, never. But I think people were just kind of like, my gosh, how are you going to put this thing together? And then you get Flory back in the boat, which at the time we said was, the biggest move that you could make this offseason, basically. You wanted a guy that could not just hit outside shots, but could score in general and could be a guy that could hit shots off a movement, off the bounce. And you got Jaden Dawson, a guy who did that at a really high level and at a prolific level. You wanted somebody that would really fit and be a defense downhill type guy, and you got Melvin Counselor. You wanted a forward who would give you a little bit more outside shot than what you'd had previously with KJ Adams, but would also be kind of a jigsaw piece, right? A guy that could move without the ball, a guy who could cut, who could rebound, could pass, do some different things. And you got Trey White. And then, you looked at it and said, okay, this is pretty good. I hope El Marco comes back pretty well. And the buzz on that has been really good. And, it's great that Flory came back, but you need a backup big man who's actually like a legitimate guy, not just a guy that, has to eat 10 minutes because if Flory gets in foul trouble, we're in trouble. And you get Paul Mbiya. You wanted a bigger wing who could, shoot, get out and transition a little bit, maybe do some different things, who could be somebody that you could grow for the future as well. And you got Cole Rosario. And I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody here, but I think that when you look at the package and the roster that's been assembled, I do think it's an A, because I think it's a team that gives you a very real chance to win games in March. And we talked about the ceiling of this team even before they got Paul Mbiya And I still feel, this is potentially a Final Four team, can, depending on how everything clicks. And I think heading into the season, that's what you want.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think when you look at just what the roster ended up being, like besides all the ups and downs of the transfer portal, just in totality, what did it end up being? What are we looking at right now? Yeah, this is basically exactly what I was asking for, which is go get guys that fit, like prioritize fit. And I think they absolutely did that. And so, yes, for me personally, I would say this is ended up being a really strong offseason and a team that I think KU fans are going to find themselves getting more excited about. Obviously you have Darren Peterson, which I think is just in and of itself going to generate excitement. But even beyond that, I think this is going to be a team that KU fans are going to find that they'll have fun watching again. And obviously, hopefully that means that they're going to be winning games too, because that's a big part of it also.
Sure.
But again, as he said, it'll be a trial by fire. We're going to learn a lot pretty quickly, I think, about where this team is at early in the season and how that's going to translate for them down the line. So looking forward to it. Also, we're going to be talking more KU football. We were planning to talk KU football later this week, but I guess we might have to maybe shift that to early next week with more KU basketball news. So we're going to be getting much more into KU football preseason stuff. I mean, we got fall camp coming up starting pretty soon, actually, for KU football. Yep. So we're going to be shifting into talking a lot more about KU football preseason, breaking down the schedule, breaking down where this team is at heading into 2025. So hopefully you'll certainly be joining us for those shows as well. And again, if you haven't, please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, and on our YouTube channel. We're going to be doing more live shows as well coming up with football season also. So you'll want to stay tuned for those and so much more. So really appreciate you tuning in. Kevin, you got anything else to finish things off for our great listeners?
No, it was it was funny because I think 2 days ago we were kind of talking about, hey, it'd be really nice to do one of these episodes where we aren't talking about hypothetical KU.
Yeah.
And then we get 2 actual editions in a row. And so,
yep.
It's nice to see that, and nice to, again, KU still has that open spot. I'm not saying they're done, but it's nice to have an air of finality now where I think any edition at this point is sort of going to be the cherry on top, and we already kind of know what the Sunday is.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had a YouTube commenter last week comment, sign anybody, please. Well, your wish is KU's command.
We take care of you here on Pay Heat. That's why you should subscribe.
Exactly. So it's okay. Yeah, the roster is in place now. I think honestly part of that was just the anxiety as well as just recognizing that the roster was not kind of fully intact. Well, now we believe it is, and I think KU is in a good position heading into the fall and then into the season. So until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.